to taxi and busmen negative and highlight the positive. In this regard, I have nominated 2 long-time industry players for national awards. I hope they will be considered. And I will continue to do so in the years ahead. In addition, this minister will be launching and hosting an annual public passenger industry award to reward those who give extraordinary service. We must encourage the good men and women in this industry. Mr. Speaker, I thought I would have laid the amendments to the Transport Authority Act by now, but the legislative wheel doesn't turn as fast as I would wish. But it is coming. The amendments will discourage the wrecking of PPV vehicles and introduce a ticketing system. The consultations for the revised national transport policy is ongoing, and the new policy will be drafted soon. Mr. Speaker, road safety affects all of us. So far, up to today, 181 persons have died on our roads. 181. It is unacceptable. Road deaths and collisions cost this country an approximate $2.5 billion in direct hospital costs, lost man hours for the victims, and this does not take into the lost man hours for their families who have to go and visit them in hospitals and visit the pharmacies. 180 families are mourning, never to see a loved one again. Plus there are over 300 persons that have been damaged or disabled as a result of an accident. Everybody knows, Mr. Speaker, that they must slow down. They know they must wear their seat belts. They know that when they ride, they must use a helmet, but most persons don't. How many of us today came here and wore a seat belt? My fellow Jamaicans, I am happy. Yes, sir. When you are speeding, have you ever given thought, Mr. Member from Northwest, if you meet in an accident, what would happen? What would happen to your family? Who would replace you in the house with your new wife? So slow down. Slow down. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, can I ask the member from East Central St. Catherine? Which stepmother? I mean Central. North Central. North Central. Which stepmother will be growing up your children if anything should happen to you? Think about it. Mr. Speaker, we must urge our people to slow down, to wear seat belts, and to wear their helmets. Mr. Speaker, this portfolio is moving Jamaicans towards prosperity. We have challenges, but we are equal to the task. We continue to work because there's much to be done. We have listened, we have consulted, we have adjusted our policy because we know we don't have all the answers, so we seek partnerships. To this end, I have invited the member from Northwest and opposition spokesman to sit with me almost a year now, and I am happy and thankful that he has accepted the invitation, and we are to sit down on Thursday to have dialogue. I thank you, sir, for your graciousness. Mr. Speaker, we are not here to quarrel. We are here to seek consensus. We are well on the way to prosperity, and there are challenges, but we are well on the way. There is no turning back. We are implementing, we are building, we are not into beautiful speaking or action, we say. We are the action team, the implementing team. We are led by a builder who will build and build and build and build some more, so that Jamaica may, under God, increase in beauty, fellowship, and prosperity. Mr. Speaker, if it pleases you.
target. And
Mr. Miguel Phillips. Order, please. Proceed, Mr. Phillips. Order, please.
Mr. Speaker, can they remove that image from the screen, please? Thank you. That looked more like Northwest Manchester. Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. The member wishes to address the Parliament. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I begin, I'd like to give God thanks for the gift of life, gift of mercy, and a new wife. And like the speaker before me, I was hoping that he would have introduced a wife too, but Mr. Speaker, no such luck. But today, man should throw something in your head from up there, so watch it. Today, Mr. Speaker, I rise to make my contribution to the debate on the state of the country's transport sector, covering land, sea, and air, as well as the infrastructure environment which support the sector. I will also offer my comments on the condition of our roads, bridges, and other infrastructure, and how the mismanagement of major projects has caused hardship in the lives of residents all over Jamaica, but particularly in the corporate area. This presentation, Mr. Speaker, will focus on the current state of the JUTC, the non-existent transport policy, the Kingston Container Terminal, and the portfolio of works. However, Mr. Speaker, before I begin, I would like to thank the people of Northwest Manchester my constituency executive and management team for their continued support and confidence bestowed on me as their Member of Parliament.
for a lot more terms.
And my 4 councillors who are here with us today. Mr. Speaker, they are the reason why I'm here. And I'll tell you after. And I will continue to do everything possible to make them proud of my representation in this honorable House. I would also like to express my appreciation to my parliamentary colleagues for their continued words of support and guidance, and to the Leader of the Opposition for his counsel, inspiration, and leadership. Last but no means least is my rock and partner and my wife, now for only 3 weeks, Shelley. And to my 2 touring partners, my 2 beautiful daughters, Isabel and Gabriella. Gabriella is here with us. And to my goddaughter, Sydney, who is visiting the house for the first time and who goes off to university in September. Mr. Speaker, you have heard me say this before.
and I will say it again. The development of the transport sector is integral to the country's ability to experience sustainable growth. The country cannot grow in a chaka-chaka system. We have been here before, and we made the necessary investments and to fix the system and give our people a world-class transport system. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, we're going backwards, despite a rosy picture and a long run-up for a slow bowler, as the minister just, a while ago. Couldn't send him to play in the World Cup. By the minister, I will present evidence that the transport sector is now experiencing the worst of times and is on the verge of chaos. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to raise questions about the government's public transport changes. Every time the minister speaks, it sounds as if he's announcing a different plan. Why is this so? The only answer is that there is no plan at all. Earlier this year, he announced some operational changes in the public transportation sector. But the real question to be asked of the minister, is there a national transport policy and plan? And why is the minister announcing unconnected bits and pieces daily? Mr. Speaker, why is the minister throwing out piecemeal, uncoordinated, poorly thought out, half-baked ideas in the public space without details of a coherent plan to move people efficiently, safely, and cost-effectively? So, Mr. Speaker, I begin with the regulatory and enforcement environment, which is managed by the Transport Authority under the 1987 Act. There appears to be an attempt by the minister to dissolve power of regional offices without amendment to the Act. Further, in relation to the process of new public passenger PPV license, the minister said he does not need a board to do that, and the regional managers will be given the power to determine who gets a PPV license. This mechanism would remove the approval power from the board of the Transport Authority. Where is the legal authority for this? What are the checks and balances to protect public interest against corruption and cronyism? The minister made another announcement that operators must install GPS tracker on their vehicles before they will be allowed to obtain, and I am happy to hear that the minister said that he had re-looked at the policy going forward, but against this background of continuous violation of the existing law. So again, Mr. Speaker, yet another announcement made without any idea of how it will be enforced. And how does it fit into the overall provisions of the Transport Authority Act, the present Road Traffic Act, and other regulations? Mr. Speaker, and when you think him done, no, him just a come. He announces plans to open up the routes, compelling the Jamaican Urban Transit Company to grant additional some franchises and further eroding the perilous financial state of the company. In the end, Mr. Speaker, we must face the reality that under this minister's dribs and drabs transportation plan, things get worse and the public should brace itself for more chaos on the roads, more vehicle collisions and others. What is the state of the JUTC in this, its 21st year of existence? Mr. Speaker, I want to highlight the frightening deterioration in the operations of the Jamaican Urban Transit Company and the overall management and movement of public passengers in the Kingston Metropolitan Transport Region. Mr. Speaker, last year, during the sectoral debate, the new minister was still navigating the corridors of his portfolio. By his performance today, he's not yet fully up to speed. On this side, Mr. Speaker, we continue to believe that the transport sector can do better, much better. There are missed opportunities in the sector. A lot more needs to be done to bring greater coordination and efficiency in the sector. And a lot more can be done to improve the overall transport experience for the traveling force who invest in the sector. It now appears that we have a transport system which is now fast resembling the chaotic system of the 1980s and which we all agree should never return. We have... You heard me? Yeah. We have... You spoke...
Order, please.
We have the subsidized government
Members who wish to speak, address the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And please do not cross-talk either side.
We have the subsidized government system operated mainly by the JUTC, which in turn gives sub-franchises license to small operators to operate on specific routes in a support role. But the KMTR has now become a dog-eat-dog world, and everyone is fighting for their share of the transport dollar, and in the process causing a fall in service, quality, and safety. In the present atmosphere, the transportation revenue of the government is not protected. In fact, based on the numbers provided in the estimates of expenditure, it is getting smaller and smaller each year. The route taxi system designed for rural Jamaica has taken over the KMTR. Hence why the minister has to set those rules in his new system. The bus routes are filled with rural stage carriage operators and hackney taxi operators running routes and converging in the town centres, mainly Halfway Tree and downtown Kingston, choking the roadways and fostering indiscipline. Current estimates are that there is now an additional 40,000 seats in the KMTR being provided in this manner and destroying the financial viability of the JUTC, the exclusive franchise holder, which has a license to provide 25,000 seats daily. Mr. Speaker, there has to be a balance between mass transit and taxis. Every other city does that. The policy has, as far as we can determine, is to just add seats, saturate the routes, and the resulting problems will take care of themselves. Mr. Speaker, issuing additional license in a chaotic system is only going to multiply the chaos and indiscipline has fully taken root not only in the KMTR but in all other urban centers. Mr. Speaker, I want to say for those who have ears to hear, this situation has caused JUTC to be now a candidate for the ICU, Intensive Care Unit, and unless the government changes course, its demise will be inevitable. Mr. Speaker, the numbers tell the story about what is going on at the JUTC. When the PMP left office in 2016, the JUTC was in its healthiest financial and operational state in many years. There was also a serious effort to reclaim its trunk routes, to increase fare income and improve indiscipline. Some sub-franchise units were color-coded and staffed subject to JUTC crew standards. Since then, it has been 3 years of decline, which must lead to the question, whose interests does a declining JUTC serve? Not the poor, nor the students, nor children, nor the pensioners, the disabled and workers who cannot afford their own motor vehicles and are therefore transit dependent. Since 2016-17, the JUTC has continued to experience a decline in its ridership from 59 million when we left office to 49 million in the year ending March 31st, 2019. A whopping fallout of 1/6 of its ridership in 3 years. In other words, Mr. Speaker, in 3 years this government has brought the JUTC back to its lowest ridership, right where it stood in 2008-2009 under JLP administration. Mr. Speaker, passenger ridership is declining because the bus rollout is declining. In 2017-18, they projected a rollout of 452 units and did not achieve it. In 2018-19, this projected runout was 425, and this was also not achieved. In 2019-2020, this financial year, they are projecting 385, but the company is currently achieving less than, the minister said 360. I say it's about 350 and less. So this year's target seems to be a pipe dream. Mr. Speaker, as the buses and passengers decline, so too has the company's revenue. In March 2016, when we left office, it was 5.1 billion, and the last financial year, ending March 2019, it had fallen to $4 billion. A drop-off of more than 20%. The company is in a free fall. In March 2016, 5.1 billion. March 2017, 4.9 billion. March 2018, 4.5. And March 2019, $4 billion. Consequently, Mr. Speaker, the government subsidy has had to be increased from 2.7 billion in 2016-17 to 5.1 billion in this financial year. The taxpayers are paying more and getting much less for their tax dollars, and the commuters much less for their fares they pay. Mr. Speaker, last year I told the government, and I restate, the JUTC is in default as it is operating in breach of the exclusive license granted by the government under Public Passenger Transport Corporate Area Act. But, Mr. Speaker, as serious as this breach may be, I want to draw attention to an even more urgent situation in relation to breaches of the maintenance and safety standards at the JUTC. I recently called for an audit after the company had 3 fires in a week. The investigation report has confirmed our worst fears and clearly shows the urgent need for both an operations and maintenance audit. The report says the fires were caused by poor maintenance and improper practices, and the poor internal workmanship and laissez-faire attitude towards work. These practices include substitution for parts and fittings with makeshift materials such as the use of a rag to tie a fuel line. It is totally perplexing that instead of accepting the findings, the managing director, and in the minister's presentation just now, claims that there are internal and external efforts to undermine the company's operations. Mr. Speaker, the JUTC management cannot leave the charges there. They must provide a complete report on those allegations to the public and also to the police. The report has raised 3 serious questions. Firstly, the availability of adequate amount of spare parts. And I hear the minister constantly says that there's adequate spare parts inside there. He said that what, $1.7 billion. Yeah? And how long it has taken you to even get the spare parts. Secondly, the training of mechanics. And thirdly, the competence and role of supervision and maintenance management in overall process at the company. Mr. Speaker, of the $3 billion needed for spare parts and maintenance, only 1.3 has been provided in this budget. It must mean cutting corners and dispatching unsafe units on the roads. This is a dangerous situation, and the risk to passengers' safety must be at an all-time high. In fact, the company's defect returns is now at a record 15%. That means, Mr. Speaker, is that when the company dispatches the 350 buses in the mornings, 50 of them will have to return to the depots or be recovered by a wrecking service during the course of the operating day for mechanical or other defects. So, Mr. Speaker, the assurance given by the management and the minister just now in a recent newspaper interview are empty and remain a comfort to a fool. Mr. Speaker, in addition to the lack of parts, which includes brake pads and discs and other critical parts, in the past 30 months, the company has lost 6 top maintenance professionals, including the Deputy Managing Director in charge of engineering, the Chief Mechanic, and 4 depot maintenance managers. Most victimized to make way for political appointments. And so much so that the fire report has cited poor workmanship as a cause of the fires. I warn, Mr. Speaker, that the JUTC is on a collision course with destruction, and passenger safety must now be taken as a serious issue by this government. I also want to use this opportunity to ask about, and the minister spoke about, the LNG project. It was announced with much fanfare, and the company would be acquiring 20 LNG by the previous minister, capable buses. It was then reduced to 5, and they have been here for almost a year, sitting in a warehouse bonded facility, and nothing further. But the minister said by summer we should see something. Mr. Speaker, the minister spoke about the Montego Bay Metro. That 17 units coming up, 14 more to add to the 4 that was there. But I have to say, Minister, but we should not have allowed it to reach to that point. I want to raise the important issue of the Portmore Transport Hub project. It is again missing from the Ministry of Transport and Mining's budget for 2019-2020. The Portmore Hub is a critical investment in providing an efficient transport service for the ever-expanding Portmore communities, which is a dormitory municipality. This would reduce some expense that both the JUTC and Portmore residents incur day after day, such as toll, which this year will cost the company over $400 million. What is the plan, Minister? Mr. Speaker, I would like to bring to your attention now, the Kingston Container Terminal and some of the challenges in the shipping industry. As you know, the Port Authority of Jamaica divested the Kingston Container Terminal through a 35-year concession agreement with the CMA Terminals Jamaica subsidiary, Kingston Freeport Terminal Limited. Mr. Speaker, the deal is done, and no doubt there will be benefits to the maritime sector and the economy in general. But the following questions remain. Did we get the best deal available? Why is the concession agreement protected by the Official Secrecy Act, never to be disclosed to the Jamaican people? What is it that they are hiding from the Jamaican people? Since the signing of the agreement, the concessionaire has demonstrated an unwillingness to share information, even with the Port Authority of Jamaica, which has a vested interest in obtaining such data, both for its own internal accounting purposes, as well as to fulfill its role as regulator over the shipping industry. Mr. Speaker, members, let me give you a little background which may help you to understand the seriousness of the situation in which we have found ourselves. The PAJ's agreement with KFTL includes a share in the profits made by the terminal, and it has to rely on being provided with timely and reliable information in order to process its revenues. In addition, as the agency managing the International Ship and Port Security Code modalities at ports around Jamaica, the PAJ imposed a security tariff on vessels and cargo passing over ports around Jamaica. The PAJ has been unable to collect associated revenues from KFTL since the concession agreement came into force, which is compromising the capacity of the PAJ to provide the required oversight on the nation's port security. Consequently, Mr. Speaker, the absence of transparency with regard to the concession agreement makes it impossible for stakeholders to understand the basis on which such practices have become the norm since CGM assumed control of the KCT. It is to be observed that the concession agreement for Highway 2000 is a public document that has been available on the regulator's website for years, and we expect the same for this agreement. Mr. Speaker, since KFTL has taken over KCT, the country has had to contend with a less than stellar performance, marked by a fall in productivity from as high as 36 container moves per hour to the current average of 24 moves per hour. Mr. Speaker, the effect is that to avoid delays in the working of vessels, resources are concentrated dockside to the detriment of operations that serve the local import-export trade. There have been at least 2 strikes by truckers who suffered huge delays and consequent losses while seeking to collect and deliver containers at the KFTL. The situation at the KCT, Kingston Container Terminal, is not healthy because there is a quiet atmosphere of animosity among the big players, and until the issues I raised earlier are resolved, the condition deteriorates. Mr. Speaker, here is another situation. In June of 2018, the Port Authority of Jamaica and the Canada-based maritime company Ocean have signed a 10-year concession agreement to improve towage services at the Port of Kingston. The agreement resulted in 3 of the latest generation of tugboats being deployed from Ocean's fleet in the Kingston Harbor at the end of June 2018. The deal with Ocean came about after the abrupt termination of a bidding process which included Ocean. However, the process continued with direct negotiation with Ocean. Mr. Speaker, Ocean has placed 3 tugboats in Kingston and started offering its service to the trade in similar terms of the previous supplier of towage services. However, on the 31st of January 2019, just over 6 months after the concession began, Ocean emailed all its customers in Kingston and announced a 21% increase in towage rates, effective the following day. Naturally, Mr. Speaker, this was resisted by all shipping lines. After several weeks of negotiation, Ocean's response was to reverse the 21% increase, reduce the number of tugboats from the 3 required in the agreement to 2, and introduce a special call-out charge to cover instances where a 3rd tugboat is required. Mr. Speaker, If the Port Authority of Jamaica has taken a position in this matter, it has done so privately because no public intervention has been forthcoming. Again, in this instance, the concession agreement is deemed a private document, and hence the public has no indication of whether increase of the type announced by Ocean Towing are permitted in the concession, and if so, at what intervals. And we are saying we want this concession agreement made public too. Mr. Speaker, the Port Authority and the Urban Development Corporation have joint responsibility for the various components of the development of Port Royal. However, the local private industry is finding it challenging to obtain information about how it may participate in the projects that form part of that development. And this stonewalling has prompted the private sector organization, the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce and the Jamaica Hotel and Tourist Association to write to the Prime Minister of Jamaica seeking his intervention to enable dialogue between these government agencies and the private sector. I hope that the Most Honourable Prime Minister has seen it fit to respond to the concern, and if he has not, may I ask, why not? Mr. Speaker, as a member from East Kingston and Port Royal said in his contribution to this debate, neither he nor members of the Port Royal community have been consulted, which in itself raises serious questions. General, while the current leadership of the Port Authority
the time for the member to speak has expired.
We always try.
Order, please.
We always try in this honorable house to be consistent in our behavior. So I ask that you request of the house that the member be given sufficient time to complete his question.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Mr. Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, members. Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Thursday. While the current leadership of the Port Authority of Jamaica attends meetings with representatives of the shipping industry and other stakeholders, the engagement is superficial and guarded. Commitments are largely avoided, and where given, they are seldom kept. Mr. Speaker, it has been 1 year since the present Minister of Finance vacated the seat of the chairman of the Port Authority of Jamaica, and the government has not yet seen it appropriate to name a new chairman. And I do not believe it is necessary to remind the government of the importance of the Port Authority and the critical role it plays in maintaining the efficiency and competitiveness of our ports to world-class standards. At present, anybody can sit in the chair. In fact, I have been informed that they have resorted to the rotation of the chairmanship, which does not emit confidence and organizational strength, which is a hallmark of the Port Authority. Mr. Speaker, we on this side have taken notice of the billions of dollars spent by the Port Authority in building out BPO floor space to attract investors to this sector. But at the same time, we are confused that the same focus is not given to near-port logistic facilities to provide additional space to solidify our perch as a main logistics center in the Western Hemisphere. We're starting now, but we should start before. missed opportunity. From our vantage point, it seems, Mr. Speaker, that the government is playing lip service in making Jamaica a main logistic hub in the region. What about this vision? What has gone wrong with the grand plan? Was it all a fantasy? From the beginning, we told them that there was no need to go back to the drawing board to hype up a new plan. There was a roadmap of several developments and expansion activities which was left by the last PMP administration. Member Hilton. Yeah? And these plans, Mr. Speaker, was the end product of multiple discussions with stakeholders. The plans are there, if they have not been shredded as yet. Mr. Speaker, I turn now to the Works and National Works Agency. But my remarks will be brief because my colleague member of Parliament from Clarendon Northwest, Mr. Richard Azan, with whom I share the works portfolio, will present an assessment and share our comments on the state of our roads and bridges and the lack of commitment to maintain and upgrade of our critical interior road network and other infrastructure. Routine maintenance of the road infrastructure remains an issue. When you look at the overall picture, it would appear that some parts of the country are totally forgotten. The only time we have seen any maintenance activities in this is the works which was funded by the constituency allocation of $1 million by the NWA from time to time. This is less than adequate to do required works. Mr. Speaker, rural parishes have become the forgotten part of our beloved country. We have talked about this maintenance issue before, and we have all concluded that it is a good thing if it is a routine and continuous, not ad hoc, which is what it is now. Mr. Speaker, a comprehensive routine maintenance policy would guide us in our approach to road maintenance. Mr. Speaker, I want to express our concern about the multiple road construction taking place across the Kingston Metropolitan Transport Region. Throughout the course of the year, thus far, we have expressed our concern by way of releases to the media on various aspects of the major projects that have caused disruption in the livelihood of thousands of residents. We are aware also that our utility companies and the major telephone carriers have made complaints on behalf of their customer base of the many breakages in their telecommunication structure, causing interruptions to the service provided to customers, both residential and commercial. Mr. Speaker, you would have heard of the hardship of many residents and business people along the corridors of construction activities across the KMTR. I'm also certain that many of my colleagues have driven into or close enough to the construction zone and have seen for themselves the level of chaos and confusion that exists and how it affects business activities. Mr. Speaker, the people are crying out for help. We are hoping that the government takes the initiative to meet with the affected business people, to find ways to resuscitate their businesses. Some businesses have closed entirely because they could not survive the road closure. No access to their premises, lack of water, interruption in telecommunication network, and the dust pollution. Mr. Speaker, we believe that there could very well be a legitimate cause of action against the contractor of these projects. So we urge the government not to ignore their appeals and miss the opportunity to take the first step in offering some kind of settlement with these aggrieved persons. Mr. Speaker, the South Coast Highway project has not started as yet, but there is every indication that it will soon begin. Our information is that the government intends to use limited tender as the means by which the contractors are procured. We strongly advise against this move and are recommending that the open tender system be used as we have started off when the mid-P program was started by this administration. Limited tenders encourage corruption, and some who are lining up are the same ones who worked in East Portland for free. The opposition urges fairness and transparency in the contract awards process. Mr. Speaker, we know what is going on. We know who is interfering and who on whose behalf. We are warning them to cease. Don't go there. Stop what you are doing now, because we are prepared to expose a level of collusion and complicity that is taking place to give the project to the politically connected. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the last time the minister spoke in the sectoral debate, he announced that the government was moving towards upgrading the offices of the Island Traffic Authority, including its digital platform and database. You further indicated that a new synergy will be formed with other agencies to deal with the traffic infractions and remove the illegal drivers off our streets. Mr. Speaker, he also announced that the driver's license application process would be fully automated. Minister, where are we with these plans? You don't have to come mile goal if you tell me. Can't tell me. In the House. This is an important area to address if we are to clean up the system by removing the possibility of someone buying a license and then create mayhem on the roads. Generally speaking, offending motorists are still ignoring the ticketing system. And while there are efforts to reduce the backlog through incentives, some people still believe that they can beat the system. We fully support the efforts of the state to apply the available technologies in this area and to integrate the relevant government agencies to increase the effectiveness of the point system. You mentioned of the Road Traffic Act, and we are in full support, but we think that is still long overdue, Minister. Mr. Speaker, on March 14, 2019, Jamaica joined the global ban on the Boeing 737 MAX 800 jets following a deadly crash in Ethiopia. In its public announcement, the JCAA said the ban, which includes restrictions on the use of the country's sovereign airspace, would remain in effect until further notice. On May 7, 2019, an American Airlines plane, Flight 2370 from Kingston, made an emergency landing in Miami International Airport due to hydraulic problems. I was happy that all the passengers and crew landed safely. However, Mr. Speaker, I was astonished to know that it was a Boeing 737 MAX 800 aircraft which was involved in the incident. I am not aware that Jamaica had lifted the ban on the MAX 800 aircraft entering our airspace or being allowed to land at any of the country's 2 international airports. My interest here, Mr. Speaker, is to invite the JCCA to update the country on the decision. Use the mic.
I believe the honourable member is misleading the House, and I would just ask him at this time to double check his facts.
You know or you believe?
Mr. Speaker, if the member feels that I am misleading the House, then I would urge him to give the correct information. I have no problem in withdrawing it if I am wrong. but then I would hope that the member will then forward the correct information. Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, as indicated by the Airports Authority personnel, it is the aircraft is referring to. That was not the aircraft in question.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, as I said before, I have no problem in withdrawing the statement. Why don't you be quiet, man? You keep on shut him up. Damn it.
Order, please.
You were born a mischief. Leave me alone. Oh, God damn it.
Members.
Chat too much, man.
Order. Minister.
And I leave you to yourself. You're incapable of helping yourself, man. Mr. Speaker. You finished now?
Mr. Phillips.
Mr. Speaker.
Address the Speaker and do not address anybody across the floor.
Huh?
Address the Speaker, not anybody across the floor.
But when I hear the yapping in my ears, Mr. Speaker, it annoys me. So tell him to be quiet.
I bring the House under control. Do not disturb you when you are speaking.
Mr. Speaker, there is an atmosphere of disquiet with the rank of the Port Security Corps. All is not well there. There are reports that the workers are not being paid on time and overtime payments are sporadic at best. I'll just urge the Minister to pay attention. All is not well at the Port Security Corp Limited. Mr. Speaker, we need a proper update on the Vernon Field project. In particular, the country should be told about the works which have been initiated and completed with the funds provided in the estimates. In the 2018-19 budget, 300 million out of the 1 billion for the aerodromes was provided for Vernon Field. We want to know what works have been undertaken there. This year, 502 million will be provided for aerodromes. I'm asking the Minister to provide the House with an update, including the status of the project and whether it is still alive. Mr. Speaker, I have used my time here today to lay out and highlight our concerns in the transport and works portfolio. Even more important, I reminded the government of its announcements, of which we have heard nothing more on. Opportunities are being missed, and the government has an obligation to honor commitments and to spend the people's money prudently. Mr. Speaker, we cannot go on missing the many opportunities in the transport sector if Jamaica intends to provide a transport infrastructure and systems to support an economy which has been expanding since 2014, albeit not at the satisfactory pace. Missed opportunities do not always return, and Jamaica cannot afford. Therefore, to miss them is an injustice to the people. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, we want to thank the member for his contribution, and we would like now to move on with the legislative side of this sitting. I'm going to ask that you call on the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Samura, proceed.
I'm looking for the Minister of Justice. Call the Minister of Justice. All right, that being what it is, I will then Yes, the Minister of Justice will take the item to deal with the Law Reform Amendment of Penalties Act 2019. We'll come back to that.
Minister Chuck, you are required to.
Mr. Speaker, this is the resumption of the penalties amendment. We're asking its contribution. I had opened already, Speaker. So if other members would like to contribute, we can. If not, I will close.
Just close.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, thank you. Mr. Speaker, the bill is entitled, or the short title bill is the Law Reform Amendment of Penalties Act. And in it, the penalties set out in various statutes that fall within the portfolio of the Ministry of Justice are being adjusted and put on a current value basis. And some of them are very out of date, as one can imagine, and some are less so, but are nevertheless being updated now. I think that the approach being taken is a somewhat piecemeal approach, because how we had conceptualized addressing this issue was somewhat different. It required a survey of all of the laws being done, where penalties are created in respect of offenses, and then categorizing them by their levels of seriousness and ascribing each to a band of seriousness. And we had contemplated some 10 bands, from relatively minor to very serious offenses, and ascribing all of the offenses in the statute books of Jamaica to one or other of those bands. And that would have enabled, if that were done, that would have enabled the regular updating of the monetary penalties by a simple mechanism such as an order subject to affirmative resolution. Instead of approaching it that way, the minister apparently took a decision just to deal with those statutes that fall under his portfolio. And I know he has called upon other ministries to do similar work. I don't know how far those other ministries are in doing that work, to what extent that work is being prioritized within those ministries. I suspect that they may not regard it as important as, say, the Ministry of Justice has done. So here we have penalties in a clutch of acts: the Bail Act, Coroner's Act, Corruption Prevention Act, Criminal Justice Reform Act, Dangerous Drugs Act, Inquiry into Causes of Fire and Accidents Act, Evidence Act, Gun Court Act, Hindu Marriage Act, Judicature Parish Courts Act, Judicial Proceedings Regulation of Reports Act, Justice Protection Act, Justice of the Peace Appeals Act, Justice of the Peace Appeals Act, Justice of the Peace Jurisdiction Act, Larceny Act, Legal Aid Act, Maintenance Orders, Facilities for Enforcement Act, Malicious Injuries to Property Act, Muslim Marriage Act, Obia Act, and I think the minister has indicated he's having second thoughts about the approach in relation to Obia. Offences Against the Person Act, perhaps the member from Western St. Mary's had a word with him about that one. Offences Against the Person Act, the Public Service Inquiries, Attendance of Witnesses Act, Status of Children Act, Trustees, Attorneys and Executors Accountant General Act, Witnesses Expenses Act, and Witnesses Public Inquiries Protection Act. Those are the acts that this piece of legislation is updating the penalties for. for the most part, monetary penalties, though in some instances they are also adjusting the length of custodial sentences. As I said, Mr. Speaker, this is a piecemeal approach to this issue. So this is a very small subset of the laws of Jamaica, which are extensive. And rather than doing it this way, I thought it would have made sense to do a comprehensive thing, which would be allow the regular updating of monetary penalties by reference to the movement in the value of money over time by a simple mechanism, so that our laws would comprehensively always be updated in terms of the penalties applicable to offences. As we have it now, we're doing it in drips and drabs. I think from the point of view of the Ministry of Justice, it is good to have that ministry's laws have the penalties on a current footing, but there are so many other laws that are not being addressed by this, and we really don't know if and when those laws will ever be tackled. So from that perspective, I think it's a missed opportunity, really, to try and have this matter addressed in a comprehensive way. While I'm on my feet, Mr. Speaker, I would also ask if the Minister could kindly, when he closes the debate, update the country on the question of the revised laws of Jamaica and where we are with that. Because the way in which our system works is that when laws are passed by Parliament, they go through a law revision process where if they're amending laws, the amendments are incorporated into the revised laws of Jamaica. We have a set of them here. And those pages go through rigorous testing to make for accuracy. And eventually, they are approved by a ministerial order. And those pages are then made available to the public that own the laws of Jamaica so they can update their laws. We have been behind in that process. A lot of effort was put into trying to make us more current. But I've noticed that we seem to be falling significantly behind again. And it's important that we don't fall too far behind, because it's easy for persons to not realize what the law is on a given topic when they check the revised laws and they do not see important amendments or new legislation that has been passed 2, 3, 4 years ago. In order to find out what the law is on a topic in Jamaica now, you have to check the revised laws, then you have to check Parliament's website to see if it has been passed as an act, if you know that you can look there. And if there is a provision in the particular act that says that it comes into force on a date determined by the minister by order published in the Gazette, you then have to try and find out whether the minister has in fact gazetted an order. It is a very unsatisfactory system because it is very difficult to get to the bottom of that process. It's an old system which needs updating. But I think the most important element of it really is the law revision process. And I would like to hear how we are getting on with that. One of the last pieces of legislation that the last government passed before this one was a revision, an amendment to the Law Revision Act to regularize the statute law commissioners, which is a body of persons who have responsibility for overseeing the process of updating the laws of Jamaica. And that was the culmination of some work that had looked at that aspect of things. And as I said, we were trying to get the laws as current as possible. I haven't seen much activity in that area, and I just asked the Minister if he could kindly update us on that when he does close the debate. So, Mr. Speaker, in closing, I would just say that we have no objection to this bill. There may be particular penalties which somebody feels are now going to be a bit high or a bit low. Much of this is a question of impression and degree, and there are no specific issues in it which jump out at me as being excessive or otherwise. So it has our support, but it is a piecemeal approach to an important issue. I think the Minister got this in his cross, so to speak, when there was a much publicized case in which somebody received a relatively mild or derisory fine for some breach of, I think, an immigration form. And that was what I think spurred him into action. But I don't even know if that particular piece of legislation is affected by this. I don't think it is, in fact, because that's not legislation that falls under the Ministry of Justice. It falls under your ministry, Minister. So the way in which we're approaching this, it is going to take a very long time to update these laws. Only one ministry has brought a bill so far to update the laws falling under them. I commend him for being the first in doing so, but I do wonder when we will get to the end of this process of doing it ministry by ministry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member from South St. Andrew for his input, but only to advise him, in fact, that everything he has said, we are doing. In other words, Mr. Speaker, all the laws from all the different ministries have been put in a matrix, over 800 laws. And it is true that the Ministry of Justice is moving forward first, but I'm aware that all the other ministries are looking at the matrix of all the laws under their ministries, and it's just for them to ensure that the penalties are updated and for them to be consistent across all the ministries. So, member, I can assure you that your indication that after that is done, then when there's an adjustment in penalties, there will be legislation so that if, for one reason or another, a particular penalty has to be increased, it will be done by affirmative or resolution. So what you have suggested, in fact, is being done. And I would agree with you, and I've intimated to my colleague ministers that we'd like all of the laws to be updated in this fiscal year. So even though I'm moving forward, I know they're working on them, and I'm behind the lawyers in the different areas. In relation to the revised laws, the law commissioners, we are working with the law revision unit in the ministry. We have too many of these things, you know, member. We want to put the law revision unit in as a part of the law reform department. So that is being worked on, and the revised laws are being looked at, and they have put a project proposal from the law reform department in terms of funding to get all the laws updated within a matter of a couple of years. In other words, that proposal was put in, and that is being addressed. So yes, member, it is piecemeal, but each ministry has to update their laws, and we hope it will come over during the rest of this fiscal year. Member, I did point out that there's one piece in here. We are going to pass it, but I would just like to point out that the OBIA law, I thought it was removed.
You take up my thing, the OBIA thing.
I thought it was repealed, only to find out that it is still the law. But you know, Mr. Speaker, there's a cabinet submission from 1975 to repeal the OBIA law, and it is still there. But I would like to bring it, after we pass this legislation, Mr. Speaker, I have asked the Law Reform Department for us to have another cabinet submission. I would like to bring for us to debate here in this House the repeal of the OBIA law. It will be put in a broader concept in terms of scamming and other things. But there's no reason, Mr. Speaker, why the OBIA Act should still remain on the statute book, and we hope to remove it in due course. So, Mr. Speaker, having responded, may I ask for second reading of the bill?
The question is that the bill be read a second time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? As of it.
No, we have to do committee.
Clerk.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend Provisions Relating to Penalties and Monetary Obligations in Various Enactments and for Connected Purposes, read a second time.
The House will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to consider the bill clause by clause. Minister Chuck, do you have any amendment?
I wouldn't do any at this moment. No, no.
Is there any amendment?
No, 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 no.
Members, I put clause 1. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? As of it. I put clause 2. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? As of it.
We only do two.
I put the schedule. Those in favor?
Aye.
Wait one second,
Those against?
Mr. Chairman, 1 second, please, Mr. Chairman. If I may just ask one question on this. Are we saying then that in relation to the OBIA Act, we are increasing the penalties in relation to that?
Dan says yes,
Okay.
subject to, I mean, if we don't repeal it, the penalty will be increased, but I would hope we will repeal it.
All right. I see. So we're
Is that
going.
okay, Mr. Golden? Do
Yeah,
we proceed?
Yes, I just wanted clarification on it because the minister had indicated that he was toying with the idea of legalizing OBIA.
You got the clarification you need?
Member,
Yeah.
if you like, we could remove it. We could delete the OBIA Act.
Amendment.
Right. So,
But I would suggest that we do, insofar as you're reviewing your position on it. Yes,
Right.
I would suggest you do.
so you would like to remove it from the schedule?
I would say yes. I would
All right.
suggest we do.
Mr. Speaker, I agree with the member that we remove the OBIA Act as one of the acts to be amended at this time, so that we don't give the false impression that we are going to be increasing the penalties, because we hope to repeal it. So we are removing the OBIA Act, members, Mr. Chairman, as one of the amendments.
Chairman.
In complete agreement, Mr. Chairman. It makes perfect sense.
Chairman. Over here. This side.
Go ahead.
If you are removing the act, then you will have to do a renumbering.
No,
If you're removing the clause.
no, we're not moving a clause. In the schedule, there's
It's
a
in the
list.
schedule.
There's a list of acts, member, and one of them, they're in alphabetical sequence. And under O, there are two, and the first of the two is the OBIA Act. What the bill was doing was increasing the fine for practicing OBIA or aspects to do with OBIA from $100 to $1 million, and to remove and increase a fine from $40 to $500,000. And that is a general trend of the increases in this bill. Members may want to have a look at that, or should have. But what the minister is indicating is that he's reviewing this concept of whether OBIA should be illegal at all, with possibly legalizing it. So in light of that, it doesn't make sense to be increasing the penalties if the intention is, or if it's not as strong as an intention, if the consideration is as to whether or not OBIA should remain a criminal matter. Therefore, the proposal is to remove all of the paragraphs under the heading OBIA Act.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Members, everybody is speaking at once. It is difficult to follow the situation. Mr. Golden, you are requesting that we eliminate that.
No, I am not. It is the minister's amendment. He has proposed that that amendment be made, and I think you should just put the amendment.
So put the amendment, Chairman.
You going to clarify for me? No man knows.
I'll speak to you.
Huh?
I put the amendment, sir.
Members, I want to proceed in order. I cannot proceed with everybody talking their own business in Parliament.
Chairman.
Mr.
Chairman.
May I just
You wish
explain?
to make an amendment to the
Mr.
schedule?
Mr. Henry, please.
Chairman.
May I just
You
explain?
wish to amend the schedule?
I am awaiting a clarification as to whether we are now moving something that will make Obia legal or it remains illegal. If it is not legal, I have reservations, because you can't deny me my African religious rights. Okay? So I don't want it to be understood by anywhere. Okay? So I am asking for a clarification, because Obia should never have been illegal at any point, anytime, anywhere.
Chairman.
Yes.
Chairman.
I'll try and explain it again.
Just for clarification, I intimated in the closing that we intend to examine the OBIA Act. The member quite rightly at this stage say, if you're going to do so, don't increase the penalty, which I agree with. So we're removing the OBIA, in the schedule, all reference to the OBIA Act is being removed, and I so move the amendment.
Member from Central Clarendon, what this bill is doing is increasing the penalties, the fines and...
I can't agree to increase the penalties to my religious rights.
Right. So we are removing the provisions in here that would do that in relation to Obia. Obia is already on the statute books, has been for centuries as illegal. The minister's contemplating, he says, legalizing it. Therefore, it does not make sense to increase the penalties in this. So,
Order.
I
Mr.
am
Henry
raising
is still
again,
speaking, and until he finishes,
I have
do not wish
asked
to
my
put it.
colleague minister
Proceed,
to
Mr. Henry,
clarify
finish.
for me what he's asking me to vote for.
Not to trouble the OBIA Act
So
at this
you're
time.
asking me not to increase any penalty, and you're committed to remove the OBIA Act from the bill, from books.
Not yet.
Hold on. Don't play fast and loose with my life. Don't ever try that in here.
No, Minister.
When you all at Cameron come here and speak on slavery after owning slaves, I banned it from, I didn't attend here. My 40 years is not for service and joke.
Member, it will be...
I want to be very clear.
Member, Minister, we are hoping to repeal the OBIA Act. We will be taking to Cabinet shortly, revived Cabinet submission to have it repealed. So we are removing it from the penalties at this time.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would ask, Mr. Speaker, I would ask that the Minister of Justice does not add to the difficulties we are confronted with. Do not confuse the issue. The OBIA Act is part of a schedule. If you do not extract it, then it will be affected by the increase in the taxes that is being applied. And you don't want to do that. So you are removing it from the schedule. You are not removing the act. You are not depleting the act. When you come to deplete that, that's another story. Don't confuse it with what we are doing.
The amendment is so moved, please.
The minister is still speaking.
I move the
Mr.
amendment. I have moved the amendment, Chairman.
There is an amendment. I put the amendment to the schedule. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Yes, have it. I put the schedule as amended. Those in favor? Those against? Yes, have it. We don't know. Members, I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Ayes have it. The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage with one amendment. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. Mike, so no one. Members, I do report the bill as having passed committee stage with one amendment.
Mr. Speaker, I now ask. Mr. Speaker, I now ask that the bill be read a third time.
The question is that the bill be read a third time. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Ayes have it. Clerk.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend Provisions Relating to Penalties and Monetary Obligations in Various Enactments and for Connected Purposes, read a third time and passed.
Mr. Simuda.
Mr. Speaker, I now invite you to ask the Minister of Mining, Energy and Technology to hand... Sorry, Energy. To close... To close the debate, and this will affect you, member, to close the debate on the Petroleum Amendment Act 2019. And thereafter, so that we don't have to get up again, thereafter, she will deal with the Information and Communications Technology Authority Act 2019 today. She has told me that she's going to be very swift with it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Williams.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to close the debate on the Petroleum Amendment Act 2019. I believe, Mr. Speaker, this bill has been adequately debated, and I will now answer the remaining questions arising from the first reading. So the first comment came from the member from South St. Andrew. He thought that the definition of assets in Clause 2 is incorrectly structured and should start with general words and then followed by specific examples. Mr. Speaker, the technical staff has looked at this and advised that the style of drafting used for the word assets is consistent with modern legislation such as the Road Maintenance Fund Repeal Act 2017. In Clause 5.1, the member also pointed out that the clause states that references to the Petrocarib Fund should be references to the Consolidated Fund. He thought that this was peculiar. Mr. Speaker, to reconcile it, instead of using Consolidated Fund, it should be replaced with Government of Jamaica. And then finally, for Clause 6.8.2, the member submitted that the reference should be to the Accountant General and not the Crown, and we will accept this amendment. I don't know. Delroy. Right, we have some amendment. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank everyone for their contribution, and I now ask that we go to committee stage on this bill.
Minister, you have closed the debate? You have closed the debate, Minister
Yes,
Williams?
yes, Mr. Speaker.
Are you
I now
requesting that the bill be read a second time?
I just asked that the bill be read a second time.
Those in favor? Those against? As of it. Clara.
A bill entitled an act to amend the Petroleum Act by repealing Part 3A in respect of the integration of the functions of the Petro-Carib Development Fund into central government and for connected matters read a second time.
The House will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to consider the bill clause by clause. Members, we are proceeding with the bill. I put clause 1. Those in favor? Those against? As of it. I put clause 2. Those in favor? Those against? As of it. I put clause 3. Those in favor? Those against? As of it. Members, I'm putting the clause requiring members to vote. I put clause 4. Those in favor? Those against? As of it. Minister, I understand there's an amendment to clause 5.
Yes, in subclause 1, Mr. Speaker, delete the words consolidated fund and substitute therefore the words government of Jamaica.
I put the amendment. Those in favor? Those against? As of it. I put clause 5 as amended. Those in favor? Those against? As of it. Thank you, member. I put clause 6. Those in favor? Sorry.
There's an amendment, Mr.
Sorry,
Speaker.
I understand there's an amendment to clause 6.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, in paragraph A2. What? Oh.
I put the amendment to clause 6.
Yeah, Minister.
In paragraph A2, delete the word crown and substitute therefore the words accountant general.
Minister, in paragraphs B and D, there are also references to the crown, which is a very antiquated way of putting it. And given that we're changing the reference to crown in A2 to Government of Jamaica, I would suggest that we also do the same in 6B and 6D for consistency. And let's stop using the word crown in our legislation with the Government of Jamaica. Yeah.
Minister, you have a response to Mr. Golden? Or do we put the clause?
Mr. Speaker, I accept, I've been advised, and I accept that the word, the crown, is antiquated, but it's still on the statute books, and so we will go with that definition. We'll go with those words.
So why are we changing it in 6A2 and you're going to have in the same provision where we're going to be referring to the Government of Jamaica that's going to hold the personal property, and then we're also saying liabilities are invested in the crown, and we're saying that the minister responsible for finance on behalf of the Crown. It's on behalf of the government of Jamaica. Anyway, I am opposed to this language. I think it's antiquated, and it's also inconsistent to use two different concepts in the same provision. So let us just be consistent. Yeah.
Do I put the clause, put the amendment?
I crave your indulgence, Mr. Speaker, while we check.
Yeah, Miss.
Okay, I'm advised that it has to remain, the word crown, the crown has to remain.
Minister, can I ask a question? If you're changing it in clause 8, why signal a change in 8 and keep it elsewhere? Are you suggesting that there are two different meanings? That will be potentially confusing. Is it a different meaning to be derived from it?
And we have a Crown Property Vesting Act, which is designed to ensure that assets of the government are held by the Accountant General if they're personality and by the Commissioner of Lands if they're realty, on behalf of the government of Jamaica. So this use of the word crown is really outdated, and it's not something normally do.
Why would you want
the minister with responsibility for finance on behalf of the crown? When the Minister of Finance signs a guarantee, he doesn't sign it on behalf of the Crown, he signs on behalf of the government of Jamaica. Or if he's signing up a loan agreement, he signs
I don't see that being a justified position. The Crown has to go at some time, and the Crown is going to go eventually. Why you want to get back to an antiquated thing like the Crown? The Accountant General is a Jamaican in Jamaica, and we must respect that name and respect the person. It says delete the word Crown and substitute for Accountant General. Isn't that what you
Chairman, I again am being advised that we should keep the Crown. We should keep those words. We should keep that definition.
For an explanation, because I'm confused. Why change it in one instance and keep it in another?
Are the people who are advising you trying to tell you that the government of Jamaica can't hold liabilities? Which is crazy. The government of Jamaica is the repository of the public liabilities in B. Similarly, the records and data of the Petroleum Fund passed to the Minister with responsibility for finance on behalf of the government of Jamaica. On behalf of the Crown. Gone way past that.
Members, let us, Mr. Chuck, may you assist us here.
Chairman.
The question of Crown, in this instance, is speaking Jamaica, not British or foreign. And therefore, the suggestion is that the liability of the Crown, Jamaica, should remain.
It's in Her Majesty the Queen.
In relation to personal property in the Crown, that should be removed. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. That's the amendment. I put clause 6 as amended. Those in favor?
Wait, no, Chairman.
Those against?
Chairman, there's an amendment to clause 6 on the amendment sheet. Which obviously that's coming from the government side, based on some points that were made last week, which we had endorsed. But I'm pointing out that 6B and 6D need to be adjusted so that the reference to Crown is government of Jamaica in both instances. And I'm asking that that amendment be put.
The Chairman agrees.
The House has voted for the amendment as put by the Minister. Clause, yes.
No, it's clause B and clause.
Mr. Chairman, we seek your indulgence while we clarify this matter.
We want us to go over this?
No, hold on. B and D. But apparently the minister is not convinced that it's to be changed.
But I said so. Members, let us reason together. The minister is against removing crown from B and D. And Mr. I am putting that to the floor.
Chairman, her last thing was
she did not say anything about this leave. Mr. Chairman, she did not say about leaving it here.
Mr. Chairman.
The issue that is raised here is that you just did the amendment to the other clause. And the same thing, Madam, I'm speaking to the Speaker. You just asked for the amendment to the other clause, and the same thing we are a member from South St. Andrews asking for. There's no difference. If you put the amendment in the other clause, you just continue with the same amendment. That's what he asked for there.
That is not the position of the minister.
A while ago, you didn't take a position, Minister. A while ago, you... Mr. Chairman, just listen to me.
Mr. Warmington, listen to me, please.
Listen, no, before you go there, a while ago, you put an amendment that the minister didn't ask for. So don't tell me that the position of the minister. You put an amendment. It didn't come from the minister. You amended to take out the crown. Okay? So you can't tell me you wait based on her position. You just did it on your own. And you put it out on those parties. So follow the same principle you said. Follow the same principle you just set, Mr. Speaker. Don't go there. You just set that principle. You didn't ask her for an amendment. The suggestion came from the floor. You took that amendment based on the suggestion by the member. So don't tell me at this stage you have to listen to the minister what she says. You didn't listen a while ago. She did more amendment.
I hear you, Mr. Member.
You're sure you hear me?
The member from South St. Andrew posed an amendment. The minister from...
She asked for some time. She asked for some time.
Rural
Mr. Chairman,
St. Andrew
I asked for your indulgence while we do some more further work on it.
Chairman. Chairman, the concerns about...
Let us do what we are doing in peace.
Chairman, the concerns about the use of the antiquated term as put is understandable. However, we have a Crown Proceedings Act which governs matters. It is the law of Jamaica. And in the act, the Crown means Her Majesty in right of her government in the island. There are specific issues relating to liability, and that is why the term is used and must respectfully remain until such time when the other amendments are made.
So what she said.
Mr. Chairman, this is not the Crown Proceedings Act is dealing with how you take proceedings against the Crown. This is nothing to do with litigation. This is to do with the debts of the Petroleum Fund. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I'll remain with the Crown in this part of the clause. We have to stick to that. I've been advised that we need to remain with that term, the Crown, and that's what I will go with today.
So, Chairman, there's a question, Chairman. Chairman, the Minister is, the Chairman, the Minister has proposed an amendment to substitute the word Crown for Accountant General. So what is the basis of that then? Sorry, the other way around. What is the basis of that if we're going to be maintaining the use of the word Crown in other areas of the legislation? It just doesn't make sense.
That's being slavish to a word. There's no rhyme or reason.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, it is clear. It is clear.
AG. Destitute.
Let me hear.
Destitute. Non-use of it. Change it.
Go on, Mr. Samuda.
It is clear that we have a difference of opinion. And when you get in between a difference of opinion among lawyers, you're in serious trouble. I am therefore proposing that we proceed with what the Attorney General has advised. If at a later stage we wish to come back to this Honorable House and seek an amendment, we do so unadvised. You cannot.
Members, why don't we allow one to
the Attorney
speak
General,
without disruption?
we have here, Mr. Chairman, I can count them. We have a battery of highly trained and skilled attorneys. And we are taking the advice of those people. And we must proceed consistent with the existing law.
So I send the lawyers here, not
we can, what is happening is, Mr. Speaker,
order, please, Mr. Samuda is on the floor.
We cannot allow our emotions to dictate our actions against the law. That's what I am advised.
Hello. Mr. Chairman,
you have to proceed as advised.
Mr. Chairman,
we would be an irresponsible government or parliament if we proceeded against the legal advice that is in the law.
Mr. Chairman.
Chairman, the question was asked.
Members, I will allow every man to speak one at a time until midnight. I'm going to hear the Attorney General, then I'm going to hear Mr. Twait, and I'm going back to the Minister.
Chairman, the question was asked about why the Accountant General was changed in one of the provision, and that is by virtue of the Crown Property Vesting Act. You may have questions, I can understand, but we do have laws on the statute book that remain relevant and are in force.
Mr. Twait.
So if you look at the Crown Property Vesting Act, you will see the reference to the Accountant General there.
Mr. Chairman, yes, Mr. Chairman, maybe if I read the clause, then members will understand why there's a different reference to the Crown versus the Attorney General.
Don't need to read the
clause,
We don't need to read anything.
No, but it will just give some added understanding as to why this is, Mr. Chairman, if you'll allow me.
Please allow me. Please allow me. You want me to?
Yes.
Then I go back to the Minister.
Mr. Chairman, I just asked.
Just to explain to members.
This thing is a joke. Please. You call me and then I wish to appeal to fellow members that the real disgrace would be if in the 57th year of our independence we could not substitute the term Government of Jamaica, to whom we are sworn to uphold, for the British Crown. That is the nub of the matter. That is the nub of the matter. In the 57th year of our independence, we cannot substitute. We don't have the liberty to substitute the term Government of Jamaica, to whom we owe allegiance. First and foremost, that is the oath you swore and I swore. Yes,
Mr.
to use that
you are
rather
in
than
Her
the term.
Majesty's Parliament.
I beg your pardon?
You are in Her Majesty's
I am
Parliament.
in the Parliament of the people
You
of
have
Jamaica.
not so moved
You
out
may
of
be, you may be in Her Majesty's Parliament. You can't even go to her country freely. I am in the Parliament of Jamaica. I don't suffer from your schizophrenia.
You do so.
You're wearing Her Majesty's wig. But we're the
I have no bipolar position.
But, you know, Mr. Chairman, from a technical...
Mr. Golden, let me just say to the Minister
Mr. Chairman, I crave your indulgence. Mr. Chairman, we could continue with a long philosophical debate. Chairman, by virtue of the Crown Property Vesting Act, property is vested in the office of the Accountant General on behalf of the Government of Jamaica.
The chairman requires some order in this committee.
And notwithstanding the passion and the politics, when we are passing laws, we must have regard to the overall scheme of the laws that we have in place. In this bill is not the place to take that debate, though the concern is noted.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to... Mr. Chairman, I want to put on record...
Mr. Golden?
Yeah, I want to put on record...
Order, please.
I want to put on record my difference...
But yes, Mr. Chairman...
On a technical basis to this point. I don't think the Crown Proceedings Act is relevant here at all. We're talking about the assets and liabilities of a fund that was a statutory fund. That act is being repealed, or that aspect of the act is being repealed. And the assets and liabilities are being vested in the Government of Jamaica. The question is, in what manner? In respect of personal property, the Crown Property Vesting Act says it must be an Accountant General. In respect of other matters and liabilities, it's the Government of Jamaica which will now have those liabilities. There's no need to make reference to the Crown. You could. It's not wrong to do it. It's just archaic and offensive. And the Government of Jamaica is inadequate. The Government of Jamaica has legal personality. It can hold assets. It can have debts. God knows it has public debt of around 100% of GDP, and it has liability. There's no reason, no technical reason why we have to make reference to the Crown in this bill, and I think we should not.
Okay, Mr. Chairman.
Member, please.
I want to
Minister, wait a minute. Could you turn your phone off? Members, I'm sure some of us don't know what the quarrel is about.
If Mr. Chairman, if we feel so strongly about this, I think we need to then move forward, move a motion to remove the Crown from everything. Until, well, we're going through this back and forth, and if we feel that strongly against this, then this is what we should do as...
Mr. Chairman,
I understand that.
I would like for us to proceed. Mr. Chairman, I'd like for us to proceed. I want to thank all the members for their contribution. This bill has been...
Mr. Williams, I'm not hearing you.
Mr. Chairman...
Because everybody is speaking, I'm not hearing you. Members.
Mr. Chairman, I would like this bill to proceed. The technical persons, the Attorney General, all the learned legal minds that we have on the government side, they have looked at this bill, they've considered it. They looked at it again when amendments were proposed, and we're back here this week. And my desire is that we accept the amendment as proposed by the legal persons and move on. We understand how antiquated the term, and I understand the emotions here. But Mr. Speaker, it is my desire to move on with the amendments in this bill this afternoon.
Mr. Chairman.
Members, I am going to put the amendment.
Mr. Chairman.
I am going to
Chairman,
put the amendment.
once
Once
the
Jamaica's
clause-
finished.
You mean the
clause
Jamaican
six.
I'm going to hear Mr. Hilton. And I'm
Mr.
going to hear
What amendment are you going to put? What amendment are you going to put?
I'm putting the amendment by moving from.
Mr. Chairman, I'm asking you to put clause 6 as amended.
Chairman, I'm on the floor. I'm asking a question, he's trying to respond to me. I'm asking the chairman a question that he's trying to respond to me. I deserve a response, regardless of who brought this bill. I deserve a response from the chairman. His chairman trying to respond to me. Mr. Chairman, in 6A, you moved an amendment removing the word crown in relation to personal property in the crown by force of this section. You amended it to say in relation to personal properties in the accountant general force of this section. You removed the word crown. You put it there a while ago and it was accepted unanimously. B, there's still the liability of the crown. I'm asking if what I put in here is the amendment into the government of Jamaica.
I have asked for that amendment to be put.
And in D, the amendment again remove crown to the government of Jamaica. You cannot amend section 6A and leave section 6B and D as it is. It's the same clause. So if the House has accepted the amendment to 6A to remove the word crown, how can you now say leave the word crown in B and D are the same clause?
Mr. Chairman.
It cannot. I'm on the floor. It cannot be. It cannot be.
I don't agree with you, Mr. Samuel.
Look,
Mr. Warren, I don't agree with you.
Look here.
I don't agree with you.
You don't understand what you're saying.
I don't agree with you.
Mr. Chairman.
There are different items and different items.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, this is clause 6.
We will put it to the House and the House will vote. Let's hear,
Mr.
let's
Chairman,
hear what the minister has to say.
I ask that you put the amendment.
Members who are disagree, vote against.
Okay.
Members who are in agreement, vote for it. Let me hear you, Minister, conclude the debate.
Mr. Chairman, clause 6 relates to
yes
clause
or no.
6 relates to assets and rights. It relates to real property. It relates to personal property. It relates to liabilities. It relates to proceedings or remedies. It relates to records and data. And Mr. Chairman, I do not believe that we should change it on the fly here today. It has been looked at and considered. And I am asking you, Mr. Chairman, to please put the amendment as it was stated by me, changing 6A2 in relation to personal property, changing that term from the Crown to the Accountant General. And that's the only amendment that I'm asking for in this clause.
Okay, we have before us a situation, some disagreement, that can only be resolved by majority vote. I'm going to put the amendment. Those in favor?
No, and point of order,
those against.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. Point
and we
of
will
order.
count.
But we have already.
We have to read the
Chairman,
amendment.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman.
I have not put it yet. I'm just saying what I am proposing.
Mr. Chairman, on a point of clarity, Chairman, on a point of clarity.
Is this what they
The
want?
member who proposed the amendment in respect of substituting the words conceded that the use of the word is not wrong, but merely archaic.
Mr. Golden, I have before me a proposed amendment. I'm going to send it for you to look at, and then Mr. Warmington. Let him look at it, please. Mr. Warmington, wait on your time. I'm coming to you. His agreement?
So Chairman,
Huh?
Chairman,
Do you have any respect for the House? What the hell are you going to talk about? The man here who is moving it says there's nothing wrong. You don't like the word, fine, that's emotion. But what does the law say?
I'm
They
Chairman,
above the law.
Chairman, just to clarify, can we
Okay,
just...
the chairman is going to use, for the first time, authority given to him by the standing order. On this matter. On this matter, there's a division in the House, and therefore I'm going to ask the clerk to stand by. We are going to count. I'm putting the amendment as proposed by the minister. First, we remove crown, and then there are two, we maintain it. Let me get some clarification and come to you clear.
Other two? No, Minister.
You know something, Mr. Man?
Minister says no to these. Minister.
Something say. Okay.
I feel as strongly about the use of the word crown, but I also respect the law.
Minister Samuel, members, listen to me carefully. In clause 6, item 2, we remove the crown. In clause 6, item B and D, we maintain the crown. Those in favor?
Divide,
Those against?
divide.
If you say B and D.
All right, let me put them separately since they are.
Vote for the two of them one time.
What?
Vote for the two of them one time.
There's a division. Say it. Remember, there's a division, and therefore, listen to your name. Those in favor and those against.
Let's
go.
Let us clarify, Mr. Chairman. The amendment that is proposed by us, for which we will vote yes, is that where in the other two areas you have the use of the word crown, paragraph B and D, you substitute the word crown for the government of Jamaica.
You can put it a little easier.
All right. Instead of using the word crown, you will use government of Jamaica.
First one finished.
And the second, and the 2 and 3.
No, we have settled the first one already.
We maintain.
So it's only in relation to the second and third references. You are going to use the words the government of Jamaica.
Okay. The division that we have that we're going to count on is in item B and item D. Those in favor of maintaining it as proposed by the minister, and those who maintain it.
Sir Chairman, I think you're putting an amendment that we have proposed. We have proposed that in paragraphs B and D, the word crown be removed and the words government of Jamaica be substituted therefore.
I have that.
So it's our amendment that we're proposing. So we're going to vote in favor of it. Those who don't agree will vote against it.
That's what I am putting before you. And then the other side say they're maintaining the word crown. And so, let's go.
Mr. Arscott?
No.
Mr. Azan?
No, hold on now. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Mr. Azan absent. Mr. Bartlett? Mr. Brown? Dr. Brown Burke?
Absent.
Mr. Brown, we didn't vote.
I'm sorry, Madam Clerk. Could you
Call Mr.
go
Brown.
back to Mr. Dave Brown that you
Yes.
called? All right, he hasn't answered us yet.
He voted yes for the...
Need to hear.
Members, order. If we are not maintaining order, we will not hear when your name is called, and we will not hear what you say. Mr. Brown, your voice did not come to us here. Are you in favor or you're against?
No.
Aye.
He says no. And Dr. Brown is absent.
Yeah.
Mr. Buchanan? Mr. Bunting? Dr. Campbell? Mr. Campbell? No. Dr. Chang? Mr. Chuck? Mr. Clark? Dr. Clark? Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn? Miss Daly? Mr. Daly? Mrs. Dalrymple Philibert? Dr. Dunn? Mr. Fagan? Mr. Fagan? Dr. Ferguson? Mr. Goldin? Miss Grange? Mr. Green?
No.
Dr. Guy? Miss Hannah? Mr. Hales?
Order, please.
Mr. Hales?
Mr. who?
Mr. Henry?
1 minute. Mr. Henry. Mr. Henry, your voice, your vote.
Mr. Ole?
Order, please. Go ahead.
Mr. Hutchinson?
Who?
Mr. Hilton?
Mr. Hilton. Mr. Hilton.
Mr. Hilton?
Mr. Hilton.
Tracy,
Mr. Hilton, we are about to record that you are not voting. Mr. Hilton.
Mr. Hilton? Mr. Jackson? Mr. Kelly?
Absent.
Mrs. Mallow Fort?
Mrs. Mallow Fort? No.
Mr. Main? Mr.
No.
Mackenzie? Dr. McNeil? Mr. Montague? Miss Nita?
Order, please.
Mr. Paulwell? Dr. Mr. Phillips? And Dr. Phillips? Mr. Pickersgill? Mr. Redman? Mr. Robertson? Mr. Robinson? Mr. Samuda? Mr. Shaw? Mrs. Robinson? Mr. Spencer? Mr. Stewart? Mr. Stewart?
Mr. Spencer is here, you know.
Mr. Spencer said no.
Mr. Spencer? Said no.
Order, please.
Mr. Terry Long? Mr. Stewart? Absent. Reverend Thwaites? Dr. Tufton? Mrs. Vaz? Mr. Darrell Vaz? Mr. Dwayne Vaz? Mr. Warmington? Dr. Wheatley?
Order, please.
Mrs. Williams?
Mrs. Williams.
Mr. Witter? Mr. Wright? How much you get here now? 1, 2, 3. 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 and 3, 9. 11. How much you get on the front page? 11. 8. 11, 8, 9.
Where's the next one?
Come. For this, for nose, for yes, is 9. And for nose, 19. Absent, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35. It's add up, Tracy.
Mr. Luton got 8 eyes.
It add up to
1, 2,
60.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7,
It add up to 63.
Who left over there?
And
Julian Robinson. Wait. Ronald Sweet. Oscar. Ferguson. Golding. Hilton. Fitzjackson. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Oh, Mr. Speaker.
No, that's for constitutional theory. 8, 19, and 35. How much?
8, 19, and 35. We have a result. Yes, 8, no, 19, absent, 35. The ayes have it.
We understand, sir.
We have a result, as I have said. Those who voted no, 19. Those who voted yes, 8. And 35 absent. The noes have it. I put the amendment to clause 7. 6. I put the amendment to clause 7. Those in favor? Those against?
One second. Mr. Chairman, apart from the amendment here in relation to clause 7, there's another amendment I want to put, which is to delete the word crown and put the word government of Jamaica in clause 7.
Petroleum. This is. Members, the amendment I have for clause 7 is insert immediately after the word under the words petroleum.
And we don't have a difficulty with that, Chairman. No problem with that. We're just proposing a further amendment. So if you want to take the first one first.
Do we take the first amendment?
Please do.
Those in favor of the first amendment, petroleum? Those against? As of it. Is a further amendment being proposed?
Yes.
To remove the word crown.
And replace
No,
it with
what's the sentence?
The,
Just remove the Mount Crown, that's okay. Government of Jamaica.
Let's hear what them have to say.
okay, you can now put the amendment, Chairman.
Mr. Paulwell, you wish to say something?
No. We're waiting to vote on the amendment.
The amendment you are proposing is being discussed by the minister and others. They have not yet ready to vote.
Mr. Chairman, we're going to leave it as is, clause 7. We will leave it with the term the crown. We'll leave clause 7 with the term the crown.
Can you please put the amendment that we're proposing, Mr. Chairman?
We have another disagreement. The member from Southern St. Andrew is proposing that we remove the word crown from item 7, and the minister and others disagree. So we are going to vote on it. I put the proposed amendment. Those in favor? Those against? Those against?
All right. Mr.
Members,
Arscott?
please listen to your name.
Mr. Azan?
Where did us call who up there?
No, we have to call everybody. Mr. Bartlett? Mr. Brown? Dr. Brownberg? Mr. Buchanan? Mr. Bunting? Dr. Campbell? Mr. Campbell? Mr. Campbell? Dr. Chang? Mr. Chuck? Mr. Clark? Dr. Clark? Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn?
Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn.
Miss Daly? Mr. Daly?
Spencer, do not disrupt the meeting.
Mrs. Dalrymple Philibert? Dr. Dunn? Mr. Fagan? Dr. Ferguson? Mr. Golding? Ms. Grange? Mr. Green? Dr. Guy? Ms. Hannah? Mr. Hales? Mr. Henry? Mr. Holness? Mrs. Holness? Mr. Hutchinson? Mr. Hilton? Mr. Jackson, Mr. Kelly, Mrs. Malahuford, Mr. Main, Mr. McKenzie, Dr. McNeil, Mr. Montague, Ms. Nita, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Pickersgill, Mr. Redman, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mrs. Robinson, Mr. Samuda, Mr. Shaw, Mr. Spencer, Mr. Stewart,
You're from the
Mr. Terrell,
one of the attorneys. Give me a line justifying why you
Reverend
say
Thwaites, Dr. Tufton, Mrs. Vaz, Mr. Vaz, Mr. Darrell Vaz, Mr. Dwayne Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Dr. Wheatley, Mrs. Williams, Mr. Witter,
Witter.
Mr. Wright. How much I got?
He answered. He answered my call.
37. 17.
We are fine up here, so we'll come back, we can take it. We are now the next one.
Is that it?
Members, the vote is 8 yes, 17 no, 37 absent. The noes have it. I put clause 8
As amended.
Oh, sir, you need to put
Sir.
clause 7 as amended.
I put the amendment to clause 7.
No, I put clause 7 as amended.
And I put clause 7 as amended. Those in favor? Those against? As of it. I put clause 8. Those in favor? Those against? As of it. How many amendments?
I think it's 1.
3 amendments.
How many amendments?
3.
The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage with 3 amendments. Those in favor? Those against? As of it. Members, I do report the bill as having passed committee stage with 3 amendments. Minister. Minister, you have to request the bill.
Use the credit.
Mr. Speaker, may I speak from a seat other than my own?
Yeah, you may.
Sure. I ask for a third reading of the bill.
The question is that the bill be read a third time. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. Clerk.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Petroleum Act by repealing Part 3A in respect of the integration of the functions of the Petro-Caribbean Development Fund into central government and for connected matters, read a third time and passed.
Here.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to ask for a recommittal of questions and answers to questions, but I must first seek the House's permission to deal with this matter after 3:15, as the time is now 6:04. So a recommittal and an extension of time to permit us to take questions.
Those in favor? Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, at the expiry of 21 days, I wish your approval to that of the House to ask the Minister of Mining the question listed in my name.
Mr. Henry. Sorry, you're just tabling the questions. Okay, good. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Energy has prevailed on us and has indicated that there are timelines that must be met. And although the time is long gone but no, it would be inconvenient and it would put the process at risk. So she is requesting that we she's said that the matter be presented to the House and that it be suspended until next week for completion. So you can put the matter. She's opening it today, and then we close it next week. She says she has problems. Well, fine. She has agreed that we will do it next week. Which is next week. I thought that had been the request made earlier. Mr. Speaker, just for the record, in case there was misunderstood, in my life I have been awarded a silver pen from the Gleaner Company on a critique of the operation and structure of Parliament. So I am not opposed to all that was debated, but what I am opposed to is any suggestion of varying from the existing law of the land. And so I just want to put that very clear. So, Mr. Speaker, I now invite you to adjourn this Honorable House for next week, Tuesday, at 2 p.m.
Those in favor? Those against? As of it. I'm about to adjourn the House, and I want to ask members to continue to recognize the standards set out in the standing order. This House now stands adjourned until next week, Tuesday at 2 p.m.